Okay, so imagine this scenario. You're standing in front of your closet,
Right.
surrounded by clothes, loads of them,
Yep.
and yet you feel completely paralyzed. Like
Yeah.
you just can't decide what to wear.
Or maybe you've been there scrolling through Netflix or whatever.
Oh, yeah, definitely an hour goes by.
Exactly. And you've seen hundreds of options, but you end up watching nothing at all.
It's so frustrating. If that sounds familiar, well, you're definitely not alone.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just, everyday indecisiveness. It feels deeper, like a real kind of mental exhaustion.
It really is.
And today we're doing a deep dive into exactly that. Decision fatigue.
It's this pervasive thing that sort of quietly drains our mental energy.
Right. And it impacts, well, pretty much everything, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
From tiny things like breakfast choices.
All the way up to massive professional judgments, high-stakes stuff.
So our mission for this deep dive is to really unpack the science behind it. Like, why do our brains get so worn out just from choosing?
We'll look at the impacts, too, which can be pretty surprising across work, life, everything.
And most importantly, we want to give you some practical, research-backed tools, strategies to help you get that mental energy back.
Yeah, and make better decisions more efficiently.
Think of this as your shortcut to understanding why your brain sometimes just hits that wall.
And how you can actually climb over it.
Let's get into it.
It's a really fascinating area, and once you start thinking about the sheer number of choices we face every day...
It becomes obvious why this is such a big deal, even if we don't always label it.
Exactly. We tend to focus on the big decisions, the life-changing ones.
The job offers, the mortgages.
Right. Those feel weighty. But the truth is, it's the constant drip, drip, drip of the small everyday choices. That's what really adds up to this huge cognitive burden.
That feels like a really key point. Let's unpack that volume idea.
Okay.
The sources mention this pretty mind-blowing statistic. The average person makes something like 35,000 decisions a day.
It's an estimate, of course, but it gives you a sense of scale. That works out to about one decision every 2.5 seconds you're awake.
Wow. Okay, when you put it like that, no wonder we feel so mentally wiped out by evening.
Exactly. Even if you haven't done any heavy lifting, physically speaking.
Right. It's not just the major life choices then, like deciding on a new car or...
No, not solely. It's that constant, often almost subconscious stream of little things, the silent energy drainers.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Well, think about it. What to eat for breakfast, which email to answer first, which route to take on your commute, which podcast to listen to, which task on your massive to-do list do you start with?
Okay, yeah. Each one feels tiny on its own.
Tiny, but each requires a little bit of mental energy, a small calculation. And over a whole day, these accumulate into what psychologists call cognitive load.
Cognitive load. So that's like the total mental effort needed.
Precisely. To process information, weigh options, make the choice. And this constant demand, day in, day out, leads directly to decision fatigue.
And that fatigue isn't just feeling a bit tired.
No, it's more specific. It shows up as this deep mental and emotional exhaustion. Your thinking gets fuzzy, your ability to make more choices tanks.
So you could have slept 8 hours, feel physically fine.
But your brain feels like it's run a marathon, completely drained.
Okay, so it's a specific kind of burnout tied directly to the act of choosing. You mentioned a snowball effect. How does that work? How does it build up?
Right, the cumulative thing. It's fascinating because the more decisions you make,
Especially hard ones.
or ones that are emotionally charged, the more fatigued your mental resources get, and that makes it progressively harder to make the next decision with any confidence.
So it spirals.
It totally spirals. Your brain just hits a wall, like you said earlier. It feels like it just shuts down. And this exhaustion doesn't just stay internal, it starts showing up in how we act.
Okay, so it becomes observable. What are some of those telltale signs we might see in ourselves, or maybe in others?
Well, one of the big ones, and it's really well documented, is just saying no more often.
Defaulting to no.
Yeah. When choices feel overwhelming or your mental tank is low, the easiest path is often refusal, maintaining the status quo, saying no. There are these famous studies, like the one with Israeli judges looking at parole requests.
Oh, I think I've heard of this one.
It's striking. The chance of getting a favorable ruling, getting parole, started around 65% in the morning.
Okay.
But by late afternoon, before a break, it dropped to almost zero.
Zero. That's drastic.
It is. And then, crucially, right after their food break, boom, back up to 65%.
So it wasn't about the cases themselves or the judges suddenly becoming meaner?
Exactly. The research suggests it wasn't conscious bias, it was decision fatigue. Saying no became the easiest, lowest effort default when their brains were tired.
Wow, that's quite sobering, honestly, the implication.
They're huge.
So instead of engaging with the complexity, the brain just opts out. What else happens when we're running on empty like that?
Impulsivity is another big one.
Ah, okay. Makes sense.
When your mental resources are low, you're way more likely to grab what's easiest, what's most immediately rewarding, even if, logically, it's a bad choice long term.
Like hitting the drive-thru instead of figuring out dinner.
Exactly that. Not because you desperately want the burger, but because deciding on, shopping for, and cooking a meal feels like climbing Mount Everest right then.
Or grabbing that candy bar at the checkout.
Precisely. That's not accidental placement. Supermarkets know that by the time you get there, you've made hundreds of choices.
Comparing prices, brands, ingredients.
Right. You're decision fatigued. And that makes you super vulnerable to those easy, high-sugar, low-effort impulse buys.
It's like our brain's filter just gets worn down. The sensible gatekeeper is off duty.
That's a great way to put it. And it affects our general thinking, too.
How so?
Mental fog, that's a really common symptom. Your attention wanders, it's hard to focus, hard to take in new information.
Yeah, that feeling of just not being sharp.
Exactly. And it hits your executive functions, those higher-level brain processes.
Planning, problem solving.
Yeah. Organizing, reasoning, all of that gets impaired. And beyond the fog, you might just start avoiding decisions altogether.
Procrastination.
Yeah, or just inaction. Or
Okay.
you just go with the default option because choosing anything else feels too hard.
So your choices become less rational, more about just immediate ease.
Totally. Less about your long-term goals and more about just wanting the decision-making process to stop.
Okay, this is clearly about more than just the number of decisions. It's the mental cost.
Yeah.
Which brings us to this related idea, ego depletion.
Ah, yes.
How does that broader psychological theory connect to this specific thing, decision fatigue?
They're very tightly linked. You can almost think of decision fatigue as a specific outcome or flavor of ego depletion. Ego depletion theory basically says that self-control, willpower, the stuff you need to make deliberate choices. It draws on a limited mental resource.
Like a muscle.
Exactly like a muscle. You use it, it gets tired. The more you exert self-control, whether resisting temptation, focusing hard, or making choices, the more depleted that resource becomes. And that leads to weaker self-control and poorer performance on the next task that requires it.
So decision fatigue is what happens when that willpower muscle gets tired, specifically from the act of choosing.
That's a perfect way to understand it. It's the fatigue resulting from exercising that choice function repeatedly.
Okay, so let's say I spend all morning resisting the donuts in the break room, the act of self-control.
Mm-hmm.
Could that actually make me worse at solving a tricky problem later that afternoon, even though donuts and logic puzzles seem totally unrelated? Is that the cross-contextual impact?
That's precisely it. There's a classic experiment from the late 90s, Roy Baumeister and his colleagues.
Okay.
They had people come in, some got to eat fresh cookies and chocolates, yum.
Lucky them.
Others had to resist those temptations, but they could eat radishes.
Radishes, okay. Definite willpower test there.
You bet. And a control group did neither. Then, afterwards, they all had to work on a difficult, unsolvable puzzle. The ones who had to resist the cookies, who exerted that self-control, they gave up on the puzzle significantly faster than the cookie eaters or the control group.
Wow. So resisting the treats literally drained their persistence for something else.
It showed that initial act of self-control depleted their mental resources for a totally different kind of task. And what's even more interesting, perhaps, is that the act of choosing itself can be depleting, especially choosing to do something that goes against your natural inclination.
How so?
Other experiments showed that if people voluntarily chose to do something counter to their beliefs, like giving a speech arguing the opposite of what they felt,
Right.
especially when they knew they had a choice not to, that depleted their mental resources even more than if they were just told they had to give the speech.
So simply having the agency, the choice, makes it more taxing.
It seems so. Weighing options and making that voluntary commitment uses up that energy.
Which leads us neatly to another really interesting idea, the paradox of choice.
Ah, yes. Barry Schwartz's work, largely.
We tend to think more options are always better, right? Freedom of choice is king.
It's the default assumption in Western culture, absolutely. More choice equals more freedom equals more happiness.
But the research suggests maybe not. It can actually backfire.
It absolutely can. While we might desire more options, Dozens of jam flavors, hundreds of TV shows, having too many can actually lead to psychological pushback. It can cause choice paralysis.
Paralysis, like you just freeze.
Literally.
Oh.
You become so overwhelmed by the sheer volume of possibilities that you just can't make a decision. You end up choosing nothing.
That streaming service example again. Scrolling, giving up.
Exactly that. It feels too big, too complex to possibly make the right choice.
And it's not just getting stuck, is it? Even if you do manage to pick something.
You might not feel great about it afterwards. That's the second punch of the paradox. Even if you make a choice, having too many options makes it more likely you'll feel dissatisfied or regretful later.
Buyer's remorse.
Classic buyer's remorse. You keep wondering, was there a slightly better option I missed? Did I make the optimal choice?
That sounds exhausting in itself.
It is. And it happens because too many options just overload your brain. It increases that cognitive load we talked about.
Right, the working memory limit.
Your brain can only juggle so much information at once. Too many choices exceed that capacity, making effective, confident decision-making way harder. And that overload directly contributes to feeling fatigued.
Okay, this all makes a ton of sense psychologically, behaviorally. But I'm really curious now what's actually going on inside our brains and our bodies when we hit this fatigue wall.
Yeah, let's get into the biology. It's super interesting. When we talk brain regions, the star player is usually the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, the front part of the brain.
Right. Think of it as your CEO. It handles executive functions, planning, reasoning, impulse control, working memory, all crucial for making deliberate choices.
So that part gets tired.
Well, it's more complex than just getting tired. Fatigue, especially when deciding whether to exert effort, seems to involve shifts in how certain brain areas evaluate costs and benefits. Areas like the ventral striatum and parts of that prefrontal cortex regions really linked to motivation and reward.
So the brain starts to recalculate if something is worth the effort.
Exactly. And it's not necessarily a steady decline. Research shows these evaluations can fluctuate moment by moment.
Really? How does that work?
Well, the lateral prefrontal cortex, involved in control, works with the anterior cingulate cortex linked to perseverance. Activity here generally decreases with fatigue, but it can actually bounce back in some subregions after even short rests.
So a quick break can make a difference neurologically.
It suggests so. It means your brain's internal calculation of, is this reward worth the effort, can change rapidly. There was a study where someone might eagerly grip hard for, say, $1 early on.
Okay.
But later, after lots of effort, they might refuse to grip just as hard even for $2.
Because the brain decided rest was more valuable at that moment.
Precisely. The subjective value shifted. Rest or energy conservation became the higher priority than the money they previously wanted.
That's wild. The brain literally prioritizing downtime over cash. Is there a direct fuel connection? Like, does glucose, blood sugar, play a role?
That was a big part of the early research. Some studies did link self-controlled depletion with lower blood glucose levels.
Suggesting you could just, eat sugar to refuel willpower.
That was the initial idea, yeah. And some studies showed glucose drinks could improve performance after depletion tasks. But it got more nuanced. Fascinatingly, just tasting something sweet without even swallowing it.
Just swishing it in your mouth.
Yeah, even that could sometimes reverse the depletion effects.
Whoa. So it's not just about the fuel getting into your system.
It suggests a faster signaling effect. The taste itself sends a signal to the brain that maybe helps restore that self-control capacity even before the sugar is fully metabolized.
So it's also about the brain's perception of its fuel levels.
That seems to be part of it. Other theories look beyond fuel. Maybe intense brain work produces waste products.
Like metabolic exhaust fumes.
Kind of. Accumulating things like adenosine or glutamate in the brain tissue. The idea is these byproducts might interfere with neural signaling, basically telling the brain, okay, time to take a break, clean this up.
So it's not just running out of gas, but also getting gummed up by the waste.
That's one theory being explored. And this fatigue doesn't just stay in the head, it can affect the body too.
How so?
Decision fatigue can lower your physical endurance. Your tolerance for pain might decrease. Studies showed fatigued people were less able to handle an unpleasant tasting drink, for instance.
Interesting. And you mentioned something about age.
Yeah, some research suggests, maybe counterintuitively, that younger adults might be more susceptible to standard ego depletion effects in lab studies. People over 40 sometimes showed less depletion. Maybe they've developed better coping strategies over time, or self-regulation is more stable. It's still being researched.
This really drives home that decision fatigue isn't some abstract concept. It has real, concrete effects on everything we do.
Absolutely. From the cereal aisle to career choices.
Let's dig into those real-life consequences.
Mm.
Starting with work. How does this fatigue mess with workplace productivity?
Oh, hugely. Fatigued employees struggle to prioritize. They make poorer judgments. They're less creative, less proactive. And it's a major contributor to burnout because your cognitive engine is constantly running on fumes.
That Israeli judge's study is the perfect, if scary, example.
It really is. The parole ruling, chances dropping from 65% to nearly zero, just based on time of day and breaks. That's a stark illustration of cognitive resources dwindling. It wasn't malice, it was mental exhaustion, leading to the path of least resistance. The default, no.
Chilling. Does it affect other high-stakes professions? Doctors, maybe?
Definitely. Doctors make countless critical decisions, and studies show fatigue hits them too. Late in the day, they order fewer preventative screenings, like for colon or breast cancer, maybe 10–15% fewer. They're more likely to prescribe unnecessary antibiotics. Perhaps it's just quicker, easier than a longer discussion, maybe 26% more.
Yikes.
Fewer flu vaccines given later in the day. And disturbingly, prescriptions for opioid painkillers peak around 4 p.m.
Why opioids specifically?
The thinking is, again, it might be the path of least resistance. Managing complex pain non-pharmacologically takes more time, more cognitive effort, more difficult conversations, perhaps. Prescribing might feel easier at the end of a draining day.
The impact on patient outcomes could be significant.
Potentially, yes. And it's not just the job, it's also who you work with.
How does that matter?
Research suggests working with people from outside your own organization can be more mentally draining.
Really? Why?
Possibly less shared understanding, less common ground.
Right.
You have to expend more cognitive effort to communicate, navigate different cultures or procedures.
Right. More friction.
Even identifying strongly with your own company can backfire sometimes. If tasks are really hard, your commitment might make you push harder, depleting yourself more.
Okay, that's an interesting twist. And what about just being constantly busy? No breaks.
That chronic busyness without enough margin downtime, recovery, keeps you in a low-level stress state, fight or flight almost. And that dramatically tanks your ability for deep, critical, creative thinking. You end up just reacting, just trying to survive the day, not really thinking strategically.
Which probably explains why we make those regrettable impulse buys. Consumer behavior must be hugely affected.
Oh, absolutely. Retailers, marketers, they understand this, consciously or not.
The car dealership example is classic.
It is. You've spent hours negotiating the price, the trade-in, you're exhausted. Then, right at the end, they hit you with financing options, extended warranties, rust-proofing, fabric protection.
All these add-ons.
Exactly. And because your decision-making capacity is shot, you're much more likely to just say yes to things you wouldn't have considered when fresh.
Like the candy bars at the checkout.
Same principle. You've navigated the maze of the store, made countless micro decisions. You're tired, maybe your blood sugar is a bit low. That impulse buy is easy. And just the sheer number of choices now, toothpaste, cereal, whatever, it can be overwhelming.
Leads to that choice paralysis again.
Either paralysis, you just walk away, or you make a quick impulsive choice you later regret because you just want it to be over.
Okay, so work, shopping. What about our personal lives, relationships? How does it hit us there?
The impact is massive. Decision fatigue undermines self-regulation generally. It's linked to things like debt from poor spending choices, underachieving because you can't focus or persist, skipping exercise because it feels like too much effort.
So it weakens our ability to stick to our good intentions.
Very much so. It makes us more vulnerable to impulses across the board. Some have even speculated about high-profile scandals, like powerful figures having affairs after incredibly demanding days. The idea being their impulse control was depleted.
Interesting angle. On a more everyday level.
Patience just goes out the window when you're mentally drained.
Snapping at your partner or kids.
Exactly. Irritability skyrockets. Small disagreements flare up into big arguments because you lack the mental resources for calm discussion, empathy, perspective taking. Studies show depleted parents might resort to more controlling food tactics with kids. Eat your broccoli, just because they're too tired for patient encouragement.
And it can flow downwards in organizations, too, like stressed bosses.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Supervisors who report high stress and ego depletion are rated as more abusive by their teams. It spills over.
Wow. And it can even affect things like risk-taking or feeling guilty.
Yeah, there's research linking feeling ostracized to riskier behavior, and ego depletion seems to be part of that pathway. Plus, depletion can make it harder to reflect properly on your actions, which makes it harder to feel appropriate guilt, which in turn might reduce positive behaviors like donating or helping others.
So it even affects our moral compass, our empathy.
It seems to touch almost everything, even physical performance.
Right, you mentioned that. How does mental fatigue hit athletic ability? Significantly. Studies show it can impair accuracy, think hitting darts, shooting free throws. It can reduce physical endurance, how long you can keep going in a run or workout, and it can slow down reaction times crucial in most sports.
It really shows how linked the mind and body are. You can't just separate mental effort from physical capability.
They're deeply intertwined.
Okay. This paints a pretty comprehensive, maybe slightly daunting picture of how pervasive this is. But the good news is, understanding it means we can fight back.
Exactly. Knowledge is power here.
So what's the main goal when we talk about strategies? What are we aiming for?
The overarching goal is simple, really. Lighten your cognitive load.
Reduce the burden.
Yeah. Making good choices is fundamental to, well, everything. So protecting that ability is key. The core idea rests on 3 legs. 1, just make fewer decisions overall. 2, make the necessary ones more efficiently. And 3, actively refill your mental tank.
Fewer, faster, and refuel.
Okay.
Let's tackle the first one. Making fewer decisions. What's the most direct tactic?
Delegate. Seriously. Find areas where someone else's judgment is good enough or the stakes are low.
So empower your team members, your partner.
Absolutely. Even kids for age-appropriate stuff. If someone else can take it off your plate, let them. It directly cuts down your decision count. Be strategic about where you spend that limited mental bandwidth.
Don't be the hero for every single choice. Makes sense. What about the small stuff we still have to decide ourselves? The low-impact things.
For those, like organizing a shelf, choosing a casual outfit, what picture to post. Learn to go with your gut. Trust your first instinct.
Don't overthink it.
Exactly. These don't need a massive cognitive investment. Just pick something and move on. Save the heavy thinking for what matters. One person mentioned a great rule. Brain generates option, take it. Not okay. 2 more tries, max. All sup equally. Pick option 1 and go.
I like that. Very practical. Just cut the deliberation short. And using core values, how does that help?
That's like installing an automatic filter. If you're clear on your core values, your principles.
What really matters to you?
Right. You can run potential actions or choices through that filter. Does this align, yes or no? If it clearly doesn't align, the answer is automatically no. No need for a big internal debate. It streamlines things beautifully.
So you build these guardrails.
Okay.
Okay. And timing seems crucial, especially for the big, important decisions.
Hugely important. Tackle your most demanding decisions, the ones needing serious brain power, first thing in the day.
When you're freshest.
Exactly. When your cognitive resources are at their peak. Rank your decisions, maybe, and save the easier, less critical ones for later when you know you'll be more drained.
Leverage your best mental energy for the hardest problems. Some people plan the night before.
Yeah, that's a great tactic too. Plan your day or your top priorities the evening prior. That way you don't waste that peak morning energy just figuring out what to do. You avoid that false sense of accomplishment you get just from making the plan and dive straight into execution.
That makes sense. Now, habits seem like a really big one here. We hear about famous people doing this.
Oh, it's probably one of the most powerful strategies there is for reducing daily decision load. It's all about automation.
Like Einstein and his identical suits.
Precisely. He wore the same thing every day to save his mental energy for physics. Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg, famous for their simplified wardrobes for the same reason.
Minimize the trivial choices.
Exactly. And you can apply that in your own life easily. Eat the same breakfast or lunch most days. Have a rotating meal plan for dinner so you're not deciding from scratch every night.
Pre-plan your work week on Sunday.
Great idea. Set a non-negotiable morning routine. Anything that turns a repeated decision into an automatic action. Someone shared they use master lists for everything. Meals, movies, cleaning tasks, hobbies. Takes the decision out of it when the time comes.
That's brilliant. It's about setting up systems to protect your future self from fatigue. What about complex decisions with tons of data, information overload?
Instead of drowning in every detail, try to focus on the critical data first. Identify the 2-3 key pieces of information that really matter.
The signal and the noise.
Exactly. Often, just focusing on those gives you enough clarity to make a good decision much faster. And without burning yourself out analyzing every footnote, you often end up making the same choice anyway.
Okay, so be selective with information. Beyond these tactics, how can we optimize our actual decision-making style?
A big energy drain is second-guessing. constantly replaying choices you already made.
Ruminating.
Yeah. It essentially doubles the cognitive load. So cultivating confidence, practicing decide and move on is huge. Also, just understanding your own default style helps. Are you directive, fast, factual, analytic, detailed, thorough, behavioral consensus-driven, conceptual, big picture, creative?
Knowing your tendencies.
Right. It helps you set up situations where you can decide effectively.
Yeah.
And it helps you recognize when you might need to consciously adapt your style for a particular situation. Maybe be quicker or more collaborative than usual.
Self-awareness again. Crucial. What about modern tools or specific mindsets for cutting through the smaller daily choices?
For those really small, non-critical things, sometimes just adopting a just-do-it mentality works wonders. Pick the first decent option. Maybe give yourself 2 alternatives max. Then commit. Stop the endless internal back and forth. Some people even use spin the wheel apps or dice for mundane stuff. What to wear, what chore to do.
Takes the self out of the decision entirely.
Pretty much. Removes the friction. Structuring your day helps too.
Like time blocking.
Time blocking, Pomodoro technique, anything that puts structure around your tasks so you're not constantly deciding, what now? Planning the night before, as we said, fits here too.
And AI. Can tools like ChatGPT help?
They definitely can assist with things like meal planning, organizing tasks, breaking patterns, but use them thoughtfully.
How so?
If you're already prone to overthinking, AI could just become another thing to analyze. Is this the best AI prompt? Did it give the optimal plan?
Ah, right. Could feed the paralysis.
Exactly. For truly unimportant choices, sometimes the lowest tech solution, like flipping a coin, is genuinely the most efficient way to just break the stalemate and conserve energy.
That's a great point. Okay, finally, and this feels critical, replenishment. Once we are drained, how do we recharge that mental battery?
Top of the list.
Yeah.
Sleep. Non-negotiable. Getting enough high-quality sleep, usually 7-9 hours for adults, is fundamental.
That's when the brain does its repair work.
Absolutely. It recharges, consolidates memories, clears out some of those metabolic byproducts we talked about. It's essential for cognitive function and willpower. Next up, mindfulness practices.
Meditation, deep breathing.
Yeah. These are proven to manage stress, improve focus, and restore mental energy. Studies even show mindfulness can counteract ego depletion effects, helping people sustain performance.
So it actively pushes back against the fatigue.
It seems to build resilience, and then just engaging in enjoyable activities, actively scheduling them.
Hobbies, relaxation.
Things that bring you joy get you into a flow state. Reading, music, nature, whatever works for you. It's not frivolous. It's essential for refilling the tank. Even inducing a positive mood, deliberately watching something funny, listening to upbeat music can help buffer against depletion or restore self-control faster.
Interesting. And work-life boundaries. That feels huge in the modern world.
Crucial. Truly detaching from work physically and mentally is vital. Not checking emails constantly, leaving work thoughts at work. This reduces the constant drain of work-related self-control demands and boosts your energy and presence when you're home.
Physical exercise helps too.
Definitely. Regular exercise and overall fitness are consistently linked to better self-control and reduced susceptibility to ego depletion. It builds mental toughness alongside physical fitness. Even external things like incentives can sometimes override mild depletion, pushing you to access those conserved reserves.
So it really is a whole person approach. Your lifestyle, your health, your mindset.
It all connects. And finally, don't underestimate the power of regular breaks. Not just coffee breaks, but real breaks throughout the day, week, year, creating that margin we talked about. That space allows your brain to function optimally, clearer, more creative, more intentional thinking instead of just reacting.
It's an investment in your long-term cognitive health.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we've covered what decision fatigue is, its impact, and how to fight it. But this concept, ego depletion, it wasn't always smooth sailing in the scientific world, was it?
No, not at all. For about 2 decades, the muscle model of willpower was pretty widely accepted, gained a lot of steam.
Lots of studies seem to back it up.
Yeah, hundreds. But then, around the mid-2010s, things got complicated.
The replication crisis.
Exactly. Psychology, like other fields, started finding that results from some big influential studies weren't consistently holding up when other labs tried to repeat them.
And ego depletion got caught up in that.
It was one of the major areas under scrutiny. Some large-scale, multi-lab replication attempts were published.
Trying to redo the original experiments.
Right. And they reported either failing to find the ego depletion effect altogether or finding effects that were very, very small.
which naturally caused a big stir.
Mhm.
People started questioning if it was even a real phenomenon.
It definitely cast significant doubt. The headlines weren't kind. Was it just a statistical fluke all along?
But the original researchers, like Baumeister, they pushed back, didn't they? What was their argument?
They did, quite strongly. Their main point was that many of these failed replications didn't do a good job of actually inducing depletion in the first place.
The tasks weren't hard enough or long enough.
Exactly. They argued that ego depletion is like mental fatigue. You don't get truly tired from a 5-minute jog. You need sustained effort. They stress that reliable depletion usually requires longer, more strenuous tasks, maybe 20, 45 minutes, not just 5 or 10. And the control group task has to be genuinely easy, not slightly depleting itself.
So garbage in, garbage out, essentially. If you don't properly deplete people, you won't see the effect of depletion.
That was the core of their defense. They felt the replications often weren't truly testing the original hypothesis because the methods were weak or different.
Were there any successful large-scale replications or studies that did support it?
Yes. Despite the controversy, proponents point to hundreds of successful studies over the years from many different labs using various methods. And critically, almost no studies found the opposite effect. Nobody showed self-control improving after effort. Plus, reanalysis of some of those big failed replication datasets sometimes did show the effect, but only when the task did actually create different levels of fatigue between groups. And importantly, one of the few successful large multi-site replications in social psychology did find evidence for ego depletion.
So the picture is more complex than just it failed to replicate.
Much more complex. Leading researchers now argue it's undeniably real, perhaps one of the best replicated phenomena if you use strong enough methods. The debate highlighted how crucial methodological rigor is.
Okay. Beyond just replicating, did other explanations pop up for what the original studies were seeing? Alternatives to the resource model?
Yeah, a few key ones. One idea was maybe it's not about resources running out, but just motivation shifting. People get bored or disengaged.
So they just stopped trying as hard.
That was the argument. But several research teams looked specifically for motivation differences between depleted and non-depleted groups and generally didn't find consistent evidence for it. Another interesting idea focused on people's beliefs about willpower.
Whether you think it's limited or unlimited.
Exactly. Does believing willpower is finite make you act like it's finite?
And does that belief matter?
It seems to, yeah. People who believe willpower is more unlimited do tend to perform a bit better after depletion tasks, at least for a while. So beliefs have a moderating effect, definitely. But they don't seem to explain the entire phenomenon on their own. The theory has been updated to include this role of beliefs.
So the model evolved. What about the process model?
That's another perspective. It suggests that exerting willpower shifts your motivation away from control and towards gratification. Your attention then gets drawn more easily to rewarding or indulgent things, leading you to disengage from effortful tasks. It's a shift in focus and motivation.
And the conservation hypothesis. How does that refine the original idea?
That's become a really important refinement. Instead of seeing the brain as just running out of fuel until it hits empty,
Like a gas tank draining.
right, the conservation view suggests the system is smarter. It doesn't wait until zero. After some effort, it starts to subtly hold back, conserve remaining energy,
Why?
to save resources for potentially more important future needs or emergencies. It's a strategic preservation mechanism.
So it's not empty, just holding back reserves.
Exactly. Which explains why things like financial incentives can sometimes overcome mild depletion. They signal, okay, this task is important enough, release some of those reserves.
That makes a lot more sense biologically. Very adaptive. So where's the research heading now? What are the current frontiers?
Lots of exciting directions. Researchers are looking more at chronic ego depletion. What happens with long-term burnout, sustained stress?
Going beyond the short lab tasks.
Right. And there's a big focus now on interpersonal dynamics.
How relationships play in.
Yeah, conflict seems to be both a major cause of depletion in daily life and a major consequence of being depleted.
Creating vicious cycles.
Potentially, yeah. Low self-control leads to more arguments, which drains you further, leading to lower self-control. It can be a nasty loop.
That sounds depressingly familiar for many people, I imagine.
It resonates. And finally, there's a lot of work identifying protective factors. What makes some people more resilient? What are the best recovery strategies? How do individual differences play out?
Building that decision fatigue resiliency.
Exactly. How can we strengthen our ability to navigate this demanding world without getting constantly drained? That's the key question now.
Wow, okay. So we've really covered a lot of ground here. Decision fatigue, tied into ego depletion. It's clearly this real, scientifically debated, but ultimately validated thing.
Affecting potentially tens of thousands of choices we make every single day.
And the impact is huge. From tiny shifts in brain chemistry, how we even value effort.
To massive consequences in our work, our health decisions, our relationships. The cost of just constantly choosing is immense, even if we don't always see it.
But, and this is the crucial part, the good news is we're not helpless.
Not at all. Understanding how it works is the first step. And then implementing those practical strategies.
Delegating, building habits, timing things right, focusing on replenishment.
Exactly. You can significantly reduce its impact. It's not about stopping making decisions. That's impossible.
Right. It's about being smarter about how we choose and when to deliberately recharge.
Making conscious choices about your choices, in a way.
So we really want to encourage you listening right now to take a moment and reflect on your own day. Where are your major decision points?
Where do you feel that mental drain creeping in?
Where could you streamline something? Automate a recurring choice. Delegate something that doesn't absolutely need you.
And just as importantly, where can you intentionally build in moments for replenishment? Better sleep, a mindful pause, doing something genuinely enjoyable.
Just think about it. Even a small shift in how you handle your daily decisions, consistently applied over time, that could really reshape your energy levels, your effectiveness, maybe even your whole life's trajectory.
One less taxing choice at a time.
So the final thought we want to leave you with today is this. What's one thing you will choose to do differently starting now to reclaim some of that precious mental energy and combat decision fatigue?